do that. Jeez, yeah, I had to restart Chrome. Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. This is gonna certainly be very, very different from my normal streams. Hey there, Ambrosive. Oh boy. Alright, so today is a bit of a unique stream for me. I've never really done a stream like this, so it's very different. Today I'm well, the purpose of today's stream, however well that's going to go, is gonna be discussing Trails from Zero. Pretty much whatever we want to talk about, we'll be talking about here. Because not only did this series take a long time to go stream through, because I mean there was school, like there was the whole issue with the coronavirus, and that changed up a lot of the workload. My old computer broke down, my old laptop, so I had to get a brand new I had to get a brand new computer. My mic broke down, so I had to get a brand new microphone. So there was a lot of stuff in the way of me completing this game. Hi there, Frodo. They do actually allow you to say coronavirus now. Not that I monetize, but you are allowed to say that now. Oh shit. Okay, yeah. So, this is gonna probably be a very awkward stream, but I really wanted to do this because the end of last stream was very quick and abrupt, because I had family leaving to go out somewhere, and the stream was also going for like 3 hours. So I wanted to make it like I want to make a dedicated stream talking about this game, because after going through 26 streams of this shit, like, I think it's understandable why I don't like it, and I don't have an outline, but I do want to go through the game like piece by piece, saying why I dislike it, what I did like about it, and ultimately why I think this game and the sequel, which I will be streaming when Geofront is done with their translation, why I think they're so beloved by the community, because after playing through this game, like, I think I might have an idea. So yeah, jeez. So this game began off with the prologue, right? And the prologue, I'll be honest with you, I actually really enjoyed the very start of the prologue. Like, I have some problems with it. The prologue, if you don't recall, is when you start off and you're with Lloyd in the train, and he meets everyone. I actually really enjoyed the very beginning of the prologue, because I don't know, like, they do a pretty okay job of like introducing you to everyone, like very briefly, but it's like the Cold Steel introductions in 1 and 3, where in both of those games, like, you meet the cast very quickly, but you learn a lot about them as the game goes on, right? As the games go on. In this game, that didn't really happen, but I did like how they introduced everyone like really quickly, because in comparison to something like the Sky games, right? Like, the Trails in the Sky saga is very different, because the first Sky game, you are primarily just with one other party member for the entire game, right? With like the occasional party member here and there. And in the sequel, it takes a while for you to like round up everyone. Oh, I got a phone call, sorry. Wait. I am sorry about that interruption. Yeah, I got a call right before this. I got a phone call right before the stream started, and then I got one now. Goddamn. Take a sip of water. Ah, jeez. You know, wait. I do wanna. Let's have some nice music playing in the background here. I'm gonna go back to the... play the final dungeon music in the background. Yep, here we go. Ayo, bug. Alright, so... yeah, so, oh boy, so... I was talking about the prologue, right? Yeah, so the prologue... I do like how they introduce you to the whole cast, right? fairly quickly, but it kind of like in my opinion, it all kind of quickly goes to shit soon afterwards, because in the prologue, right, like, you're saving those kids in the Geofront, and it's honestly like I kind of did enjoy it, because it showed a character fault of Lloyd's, right? And that character fault is that he puts himself in danger to save every... He puts himself as the expense to save everyone else. Like, I think it was Randy or Arios who put it the best. They called him a martyr, right? Which I think is a really cool character trait. Like, it's pretty similar to Reen's, and I think Reen handles it a lot better than how... Like, I think Reen's conflicts are written far better than how Lloyd's are, because Lloyd, the problem with him is that issue of him putting himself at the forefront to sacrifice himself is never, like, unless I'm not recalling correctly, that that's never really brought up again, right? Like the thing with Lloyd is that after that prologue part where he puts himself in danger to save those kids and the rest of the SSS by extension, that never happens again throughout the entire game. Like you never see him put himself in front of like impossible odds by himself in order to save somebody or something, right? Like it's a very bizarre choice with the writing, because they establish that he has this half martyr complex, right? But they don't ever delve into it further beyond that point. Like they do joke about how he's like, oh, like he's like so like he's like so good-hearted, right? But they don't ever push it beyond what happens in the fucking prologue, right? So in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and even the finale, like he's very he feels like a developed character, which is a huge problem, honestly. Because the only other issue that kind of placates Lloyd as a character is the death of his brother, right? And his brother, like, at first, like, when you begin the game, right, it's a fairly interesting premise, right? Like, it's a bit cheesy, but having a dead brother and Crossbell that you don't know the circumstances behind of is actually it's a very cheesy it's a very cheesy like backstory, but I think for a character like Lloyd it kind of works, right? Because he kind of sees himself as this like underdog to an extent, right? Like where he wants to reach the same level that Guy was at, right? But the issue is that the thing with Guy's death is that not only is that such a minute factor in this game, which, by the way, like, even though this is delved further into the next game, this is the protagonist's backstory and character, and having it not established in the first game where you're supposed to feel attached to him is a pretty big issue with the writing. So yeah, like, I mean, I would have probably been far more, like, because, honestly, as a character, right, like, Lloyd is, in my opinion, one of the worst characters in all of Trails. And throughout the entirety of this game, and when I played it through, as well as the sequel, for reasons I'll talk about at some later point, I felt no attachment to Lloyd as a character, right? Like, I didn't care about him in the slightest throughout this entire game. And I think Frodo kind of pointed it out at some points too, where Lloyd just seemed very flat, very stale, very bland, right? Like he kind of felt like he had no real character to him. Which, not only is that, like, an issue in any JRPG, but in Trails especially, where you have such strong character-driven stories, right? Like Trails in the Sky, right? Like that is a very plot-driven, more so than character-driven trilogy, right? Like, for the most part, but the characterization in the Sky Saga is far stronger, because they relate the they relate the actual issues of the plot to the character's faults to a far better degree than what Zero does, you know? And Cold Steel, by direct contrast, is a very character-driven saga, which is why I prefer a lot more. I'm not saying that a story-driven saga is a bad thing, because, you know, like, you kind of need the story to move forward, but I think in a case like this, where you have a story that kind of delves into a relative of the main character, right? That the main character is trying to equalize or surpass, right? With like with like not enough backstory on his character is very, very bizarre as a writing choice. Yeah. So Kevin, I was going to bring him up. Yeah. So Kevin had more backstory in his Pinky than Lloyd in total. Yeah. So Sky Third, which is my personal favorite Sky game. It's a very different. It's certainly it's by far the most unique Trails game because of its like format and structure, right? Like Sky Third, it's essentially a dungeon crawler with like lore tidbits here and there, and with its own small, albeit really well written story, right? And the protagonist of that game is Kevin, who is a character you see in Sky Second, but you learn a lot about him in Sky Third, right? And I guess, and like I know it's because Sky Third, like they weren't intending on having him as a protagonist for past that game, but the sheer fact that, I can't call it a fact, but like Kevin's character in Sky Third is like, he has such an engaging, like saddening, and just overall just incredible backstory, right? That kind of hooked me for the entire game. Like beyond the lore that you see throughout Sky Third, Kevin's character conflict was the strongest driving motivation for me to keep on going throughout that game. Like it was really, really good. And you have Lloyd in this, who, like, they have like 1 or 2 flashbacks to Lloyd's character, right? I believe it's like 1 or 2 flashbacks, yeah. And those 2 flashbacks that I'm thinking of are the first one where you see him with Cecile and some other people at Guy's funeral, right? And then the other one you see is when Lloyd is talking to Guy as he's about to leave to go find Tio and save her, right? The issue with both of those flashbacks is that they focus too much on Guy, right? Which isn't a bad thing, like fundamentally. Let me take a sip of water. I'll probably have to refill here soon. Oh jeez, so yeah, so like, Jesus Christ, sorry. There's like a lot of gas in me now. Oh jeez, okay. So fundamentally, right, I think it's good that Guy's character was a focal point in those Lloyd flashbacks, albeit they were very like few in number, but I think that's a very good thing, right? Because Guy he's the most integral part to Lloyd's backstory, right? Like Lloyd's purpose in life right now, his overall goal is to reach Guy's level and possibly even surpass him, right? So it's good that these flashbacks are like, they have Guy as a focus, but a big issue with just having Guy is that you kind of miss the mark on Lloyd himself, right? Which I think is kind of obvious. Like, in those flashbacks, I never got a sense of how Lloyd was, you know? Like, when you see him at the funeral, he is like very quiet, very stern, like he's trying to hold back his emotions, right? Like he's very stoic. But the issue is that that's all they show in that flashback, right? Like they don't show any other aspect of Lloyd's character, right? And when you see him talking to Guy in when he was going to go save Tio, it was very weird because not only because like the thing with Lloyd is that he was like throughout the whole flashback, Lloyd was just like worried about Guy, right? And Cecile by extension, like there's never a focus on Lloyd himself, you know, like it's a very weirdly written character, honestly. Like I've never seen a character, let alone a protagonist, in any media so far that I've experienced, where the character themselves feels like they're not their own character when you're introduced to them, right? Like, Lloyd feels like a shell of Guy to me. Like, he does not feel like an actual, like thought out, developed character at points, right? Like, because Lloyd is developed, which is a bad thing, as I'll go into later, but like with how much he goes on and on about Guy, and how little you learn about Lloyd's character himself, like his personality quirks, his likes, his dislikes. He just feels like a shell of a protagonist that they decided to scrap. You know, like there's not really much positive I can say about Lloyd as a character, because there's just no redeeming qualities about Lloyd, you know? Like, he's very terribly written, very terribly paced. His character issue of being a martyr is kind of tossed out the window after the prologue. There is proper teamwork already established throughout all the in between the chapters, right? Like, they decide, I don't know why they decided to do this, but they decided to have these time skips in between, like these week or so time skips in between the chapters, right? Which, I mean, Cold Steel does that too, albeit I think it works far more effectively in that game, in that saga, I mean. But here, like, they skip out on showing you the closeness developing between the cast, right? Like, and when you see them be close, it's like, how did we get to this point, right? Like, I guess we had time skips and I guess they're close now. You know, like, you never see it happen, you know? Just likes bad dudes, likes his brother Guy and his brother Guy. Oh my god. Oh, fucking Lloyd, man. But yeah, I mean, I am really hoping that the upcoming Trails game, which is, Hajimari no Kiseki, I'm really hoping that Lloyd and the rest of the cast for Crossbell get more character interaction and development, because they are a big focal point for this upcoming game, right? So, and like, while they can't fix Crossbell as a duology, I think they could maybe improve on Lloyd's character, because honestly, like, I think Lloyd, like, fundamentally has a very compelling, like, character conflict, right? Like, his brother's dead. He's trying to, like, find out, like, what happened to him, but he's also grasping with being a new detective, right? Like, there's a lot of cool aspects to his character that are just never fully realized, you know, like, because they make him a fully developed character pretty much near the beginning of the game, you know? Like, he has no real, like, startling, like, he has no, like, gaping character flaws that make you give a shit about him, you know? Crossbell could have used something like Laura and Fee in the first Cold Steel. Yes, Laura and Fee butting heads had more. You know, so Cold Steel. So, like, you know, like, I used to not be, like, the biggest fan of Cold Steel 1, because Cold Steel 2 and 3 and even 4 kind of just blow it out of the water, in my opinion, right? But when I played this game, right, I kept making unconscious comparisons to Cold Steel. Cold Steel 1, I mean, sorry. And the reason for that is because as a first game in a saga, Cold Steel 1 is just, it's far more effective, you know, like not just with its, like, not just with the plot, but also with just the characters, you know, like, not only does Reen have very obvious, character flaws, right, like, he's not necessarily a better Lloyd, but he has some aspects of him that kind of make him feel like a better Lloyd, right? Like as a character, like Reen has very clear, detectable character flaws that kind of made me care about him a lot more, you know. And then the whole cast by extension, right? Like there's so much like fighting in Cold Steel, you know, like with Laura and Fee, Machias and Eustace, Elisa and Reen, right? Like there's a lot of like character collusion in Cold Steel 1, right? And I think it's fantastic because it shows that these are still people that are growing up, they're going through problems, right? And they're developing, they're changing, right? Like they're not stagnant characters. Whereas in Cold Steel, right? Like whereas in Crossbell, right, like, like, for the majority of these characters, like, Lloyd feels the exact fucking same. Randy kind of feels the same for the most part. He does have some development, but it's very light. Ellie, literally the same exact character, like, from beginning to end. Tio, she doesn't really change, per se, like, you learn about her, which I think is, good enough. Machias and Eustace is just them being tsundere. Oh yeah, so yeah, I think I talked about the prologue long enough. Let me go refill my canteen of water here. I'll be back in 1 second. Huh. There seems to be some stuff happening in the hallway of my apartment because I hear some like yelling. Hopefully that's not about me, which I really doubt it is. Okay. Okay, so so yeah, the prologue we talked about. Next up is chapter 1. So I'll be real with you, I don't exactly recall every chapter that vividly because they all kind of blend in. So chapter 1 I believe was oh yeah, chapter 1 was the mafia shit, yeah. So the thing with chapter 1 that I think makes it a really bad chapter is just the focus of it, right? So, like, I'll be real with you, right? Like, the whole conflict with the Mafia, like, with Wald and Wazy, the Red Vipers, and the Testaments, like, I don't know what you're supposed to, like, care about or feel attached to in that chapter, because not only, like, is every character in the Mafia, like, well, it's not the Mafia, sorry. Well, yeah, they're involved, but not only are the Red Viper gang and the Testaments, like, very, like, bland gangs, right? Like, neither of them have engaging characters at all, like, Wazy's on the border of being cool, but he's just kind of there. you know, like he doesn't really have much going for him, you know. Oh my god, fucking Sky 2's 4 towers. Yeah, so I don't know, like, to be, like, personally speaking, the whole thing with the gangs in the downtown was just kind of a big waste of time. Because, like, the characters didn't really, like, the main cast, they didn't really feel like they grew from it, right? The conflict itself was not intriguing in the slightest. The payoff wasn't that interesting, like, there was just no redeeming factor to that whole chapter. And you learn a bit more about, Ravesh and stuff in that chapter, right? And it's like the whole thing with, like, the Mafia in this game is just like, am I supposed to care? Like, I don't know, like, I guess they're there. And they're kind of bland and stale, and they don't really have any, like, they don't have any engaging character traits that make me give a shit, right? Like, I don't know. It's like, it's a very, like, weird chapter to me, you know? And, like, beyond that, right? Like, the cast themselves are just, like, very, like, they already feel like a team, you know? It doesn't really make sense to me. And, like, I guess what they were going for here is that, like, oh, like, Lloyd is already, like, he did really well on the like, he did really well in the police academy, right? Like, he got high marks, like, he passed easily, he's, like, really fucking smart, right? Like, he's, like, really good. Ellie is the mayor's granddaughter, right? So not only is she very knowledgeable, right? Like, she's traveled the world, right? Like, she's done a lot of traveling. She's great with a gun, like, and Ellie's on purpose as a character, right? Like, her motivation is honestly kind of cool, right? Like, she's trying to get a different perspective on Crossbell's conflicts as someone from the police, rather than being just the mayor's granddaughter, right? Like, than just being stuck in that political sphere. But they focus so little on Ellie's character, right? And she feels like the exact same character throughout the whole entire game, right? Oh my, yo, that would have been so good. I would have liked to see Lloyd's theoretical skill contrasted with the dirty reality. Yes, I want him to freeze when he's actually threatened by thugs, right? Like, that's the thing, right? Like, that's what makes me so confused, is that, like, I get making Lloyd an established, detective, right? Like, well, like, I get making him, like, a very smart guy, right? Like, they establish that Lloyd is a very capable individual, right? Which, for a new protagonist, that is not a problem at all, right? Like that could be a great thing, like how Reen does it, right? Like, Reen is a very capable individual, but he has very strong faults that hold him back, right? That he has to overcome. And that's kind of ironic, because Reen has far more compelling barriers than Lloyd and Co, right? But whenever Lloyd is in a conflict in this game, right, like, you only ever see him, you only ever see him annoyed or confident, right? Like, you don't ever see him intimidated, which I don't understand, because he's, like, regardless of how well he's performed in school, right? Like, he's a brand new, fresh off the block detective, right? Like, he should feel intimidated by all these things, right? Like, he should freeze up. He should have all of these very glaring faults that he has to overcome, right? Because there's no excuse for why a new detective should just kind of just, like, breeze through all these things, right? Like, I don't really understand it. Frodo's got it. It makes sense when a superhero like Batman or Superman pounds 100 thugs and doesn't break a sweat. But Lloyd is not a superhero. and he's 100% human without any enhancing tech. Yeah, well, aside from like just like the powers, because Lloyd's a pretty strong guy, right? Like he's gone through police training, but the fact that like he's barely like you barely see him like struggle, like you only see him struggle in fights like a handful of times maybe, right? Like the fact that you barely see that happen, the fact that you barely see him intimidated or scared, it's such like a bizarre, like it feels like they skipped the game, right? Like I feel like Lloyd's time living abroad in Calvard would have made a fantastic first game or something, right? Because at least maybe then he would have felt like he would have been a lot more like fragile and like not as developed as a character, right? So I don't know. Ellie is a character that I really struggle to understand the premise of a lot of the time, because while the concept of her character is really cool, as I just stated, right? Like she's trying to get a different perspective on Crossbell because she's tired of being stuck in the political sphere, right? Like being a police officer is going to help her see things from different perspectives, right? Which is really damn cool, right? But man, like throughout this whole game, she just doesn't do anything, right? Like I don't know what else to say about Ellie that I haven't said before, right? Like she has no character whatsoever. All of her contributions to characters and to conversations in this game are merely support. She never plays an active role. She's just kind of there, right? Like she feels like, similarly to Lloyd, Ellie feels like a shell of what a great character could be, right? Like she feels like just like a shell. And I feel like it's kind of ironic that I'm calling them shells, right? Because if you call someone a shell of a character, right? Like some may think that, oh, it's because they haven't fully developed, but in here it's kind of the opposite, right? Like they feel like shells because you haven't seen them go through the growth, right? Like they don't really feel like actual characters. Like they just feel like they were rushed out into production a little bit, right? Like that's how I feel about it. So yeah, Ellie, in my opinion, Ellie is by far, I think, the worst character in all of Trails without any any thought. I could say without a doubt that Ellie is by far the worst character in all of Trails, because I just can't see any redeeming factors about her character, right? Like she's just stale, bland, boring, which is the worst sin of any character, and just kind of there, right? Like I don't really know what else to say about her. Like that conversation that Ellie and Lloyd have, I think it's in chapter 2 or 3. I think it's 2, where they're on the roof of the of the annex. That conversation is heralded by a lot of Crossbell fans, right, to be one of the best scenes in all of Trails, right? And I am not exaggerating. Like that is how it is seen. But you can go back and see how I talk about that scene during that stream, but that scene was like, it was embarrassing. That scene felt embarrassing to me because not only do they both feel like shells of characters, but neither of them have any actual character focus, right? Like you learn about Ellie's family, which I'll be honest, is a really cool, I think, which I think is a really cool part of that scene, right? Like you don't really learn about Lloyd's like parents or anything, right? Because I guess fuck that. But Ellie, like, learning about her parents and like their conflict is good, but the issue is that they kind of bring that up, right? But it's never brought up ever again. It's never a factor ever again. It's just there, right? It's just there. It does not enhance her character in any way whatsoever. It's just there. It does not add to her in any way for the rest of the game. And I've gone into far more depth about it during that stream, but yeah. And her character does get worse in Azure, which I've talked about very briefly, but yeah. So Tio as a character, I think, is one of the better characters in Crossbell, which is not saying too much, because I still think that Tio, she has some pretty big problems as a character, primarily in the sequel, because in Trails from Azure, she isn't in there for like half the game, which is pretty fucking awful. I don't know why they did that. It's like really bad. But as far as this game is concerned, Tio is a very well written character. Like you learn about her backstory, her issues with people, like her trauma, her trying to come to terms with that. Like it's it kind of got me when I was first playing the game, you know? A lot of Crossbell characters are half realized with some decent ideas present that could be worked with by a writer who has the same time to flesh them out, who has the time to flesh them out. Crossbell feels rushed, and I think that's the heart of it, right? Like, from what I know, Crossbell was not supposed to be an arc, right? Like, after Sky was finished, Cold Steel was supposed to be the next saga, right? And it feels like it. If you jump from Sky to Cold Steel, I think it feels like a proper evolution. But Crossbell, like, it definitely, like, I could definitely like see how this wasn't planned. At the very start, like I could see how, because it feels very half-assed in like every way possible. But yeah, Tio, I do have to give praise where praise is due, because Tio is she's a fantastic character in this game. The fanbase does have a pretty big problem of like obsessing over her, which does make it pretty damn creepy. But as a character, like, I can't deny that she is very well written in this game. She is really great in this game. And Randy, so Randy in this game is a little worse than I remember him being. He's far better in the sequel. Like, he's the highlight of the sequel. He's the best part of Trails from Azure, right? But in this game, like, you get like brief like sneak peeks to him, which I think is good enough for the most part. And you can see what kind of problems he has, right? Like, as a former member of the Jaegers, right? Like, he has some very enticing character issues, right? Like, I do like his character quite a bit. And that conversation that Lloyd and Randy have, I think it's in chapter 3 or 2 or something, where it's like after they do the race against Estelle and Joshua and Wald and Wales, right? Like they have that like romance conversation. Like, it's a really great scene, right? Like Randy, I think he's the only like example of a character they set up. They do a good job of making a foundation for him in this game, right? Like you know a bit about his background, like how he is as a character, his personality, and you can kind of get a sense of what issues he will be facing in the sequel, right? Like, they do a fantastic job with him, I think. Tio's really cute, yeah. Tio is quite cute. Jeez. But yeah, so I've talked about the main cast. next up, I think I'm going to talk about Sergey. So, first of all, I do really have to say, I mean, I shouldn't even have to say this, but in case, like, rest in peace to his Japanese voice actor. His VA, Sergey's Japanese VA died. I think it was last year he passed away. I think it was from some disease, right? So it should be obvious that my issues with Sergey as a character do not at all factor into the voice, which I feel like that should be obvious, but I do have to clarify it, right? But yeah, Sergey is also, like, he's not quite as bad as Ellie, I think, but he is a pretty terrible character. Throughout pretty much almost the entire game, Sergey feels like a very shitty, half-assed boss, right? Like, he does not feel like an adequate superior at all, right? And he also barely has any screen time whatsoever. Like, it's really, like, whenever he was on screen, I kind of forgot that he was a character, right? Like, it was really bad. In the finale, they do try to redeem him a bit by driving the SS towards the ancient battlefield and him getting shot. Like, that was a cool moment, but it was far too little too late. Like, the fact that he has almost no presence for the entire game and is just kind of a piece of shit for almost the entire game is like, that kind of already ruins his character, in my opinion. And making him have one cool moment in the finale. Well, yeah, so he drives them and he tries to, like, fend off the possessed CGF in the city, right? But those, like, very, like, few moments do not negate, like, the lack of character he's had, the lack of presence he's had for the entire game, right? Like, I couldn't help but compare Sergey to Sarah, right? Like, from Cold Steel. Like, Sarah, in my opinion, right, throughout all the Cold Steel games, and especially in the first two games too, like, she's a fantastic mentor, right? And I think it's because she's a teacher and Sergey is just a boss, right? But I think, regardless of his position, Sergey just has way too little presence and too little way too little character traits and uniqueness to make him feel like an actual character, right? Because like Ellie and Lloyd, he does feel like a shell of a character that can be truly great. Sarah, by comparison, is just fantastic, right? Like, she feels like a proper a mentor to Class 7, right? Like, she is lazy, right? And you see that firsthand, but you see how she cares in the first game already, right? Behind the guise of the laziness that she likes to flaunt, right? She's a really fantastically written character, because I could feel like she was an actual teacher, right? Like, I don't know, I just really fell in love with Sarah's character. But Sergey is a really awful superior, I think, because regardless of them being in professional positions and not being students, like, you still have to give that does not give you an excuse to make their boss just not feel like he's there. You know, like, I just don't really understand the purpose of Sergey's character when he has, like, no presence whatsoever, right? Huh. Oh jeez, yeah. So that's how I feel about Sergei as a character. Just really half baked, really just really shitty. And as for the other characters, there is Rishia Mao, who I'll be honest with you, I don't really understand the infatuation with her in the fan base because because I guess it's because she's hot, which I guess, I mean, I don't know, like, I don't think that kind of I don't think her being hot is enough to make her like popular, but that's just me. If this were a different series, then yeah, but with how Trails like tends to handle its characters, right? Like, I would think that a character that would be well written would be more popular than someone who's just kind of shit, right? There is a lot of hentai of Rishia, right? My god. But yeah, so Rishia Mao is a character who I also think is really just awfully written. Not only does she not develop at all throughout the entirety of both Zero and Azure, but her presence is very scarce. She just kind of, like, I don't know how to properly describe Rishia's problem, but I think it's just the fact that she just, like, she too already feels like she's developed and established, right? Like, Crossbell as a saga feels like we've jumped into this already, like we've jumped into this like these games that already have characters that we can't see grow anymore, right? Like, that's how it feels to me. Because because I have more problems with Rishia in the sequel, which I'll get into when we play Azure, but because I've been talking. Because, like, if I talk about Azure in the stream, it's gonna take even far longer. But yeah, on Rishia, she already feels established. The way you find out that she is, like, I do like how they hint towards her being yin, right? Like, it was Silver Moon, Golden Sun, I think, and that means, and that correlates to her name in the Eastern language, right? Which is hinted at throughout the chapter. Like, in terms of in terms of just the plot, that is some real Phoenix Wright level. That's some really Phoenix Wright level genius, right? Like, that's really cool foreshadowing, but that sadly does not salvage her character, who is just kind of bland. Like, I've been calling every character pretty much just very bland and stale, but that's how they all feel, right? Like, they all just feel shit. They all just feel like they could be so much greater, so much more interesting if they had actual faults and just weren't shown to be these really strong, developed, established forces, right? See you, Frodo. Right, like the SSS as a whole is not really established. They are shown to not be well beloved in the public's in the eyes of the public, right? So they have time to grow collectively, but as individuals, they already feel developed, which is, I think, the root of the problem there, right? Because having developed characters in this group, right, that is trying to be more recognized is cool in concept, but they do very little to make their own, to make their unique character actions kind of show in the middle of them being, in the midst of them being a group, right? So yeah. Honestly, the other chapters kind of blend into me, right? Like, the whole Crossbell Festival did not feel like a festival to me at all. It felt very lazy and half-assed, which I think is partially due to it being on the PSP, right? Like, there's only so much they could do. But I think with something like a festival, like this should have been on a different like console if at all possible, because it really killed the mood in my opinion. Like when the festival was happening, it just kind of felt like standard crossbow, right? Like it didn't feel at all different to me. So yeah, who else? Ilya. Honestly, she is kind of interesting, but she's kind of like she's very much a background character for the most part, right? Like, I don't really have much to say about her. I do like she too has the issue of already being like this like fully grown, developed character, which is a pretty big issue in Crossbell, right? There is Arios, who, sorry for all the burps, sorry. There's Arios who I think I think as like he's sort of like the Cassius of this saga, like sort of. Well, not exactly, but like he kind of plays the role a little bit, but he also has the problem. But he has the problem of being like a developed, strong character, but I don't think it's much as much as a problem for him, because I think in his case, right, like he's especially supposed to feel like this like insurmountable wall, or as the game cringely likes to put it, a barrier for them to overcome, right? So I think they handled that well, but I personally just did not care for Arios because he kind of has very little character to him, right? Like at least that's how it felt like to me. Like he's just he's this really strong guy. He cares about his daughter, and that's kind of it, right? Like I'm not sure what else about him I'm supposed to care about, right? Or if that's really it. I want Ilya to step on me, but aside from that, yeah, not much to say about her. Yeah. So I think what it ultimately comes down to here, the last two major characters that I have to talk about here are Estelle and Joshua, who jeez. So I do like them a lot, right? Like they are really amazing, compelling, and engaging characters, right? Like I don't like them as a pairing at all, but I do like them as characters individually, right? Because the romance to me felt pretty forced in Sky, and in this, it's not really like it doesn't feel forced in this game, which I think is a really great thing, right? Even though they are clearly a couple, they don't like flaunt it in your face, right? Like I do like that a lot, as someone who doesn't really like the pairing too much, right? But Estelle and Joshua, I think, creates one massive issue with this game, which is that, so like Trails from Zero, right? Like it's the first game in the Crossbell duology, and I think it would have been far, far better if they just had the Crossbell only characters have the spotlight for this game, right? Without any Sky interference, because like in my opinion, right, like involving Estelle and Joshua so heavily is really cool as fan service, right? Like for people who have played Sky. But the fact that they're so involved in this game really does take away from any potential character moments and character growth that I think the Crossbow cast could have had, right? Because it does really feel like it does really feel like Estelle and Joshua steal the spotlight, right? Like it does kind of feel like I'm playing like Sky 3.5 or something, right? Like it doesn't, like there were a lot of moments where I just kind of feel like the Crossbow cast should have dealt with this instead of Estelle and Joshua, right? Because Estelle and Joshua don't really they don't really need more screen time, I think, right? Like it's cool that they get it, but I think the crossbow cast obviously needs that screen time a lot more than how much Estelle and Joshua get. Ren is a very unique case, right? Like, I do really like how her character arc was handled in this game. Like, that is by far my favorite part of this game, is Ren's character, which is funny because that's a carryover from Sky, right? But at the same time, Ren's character arc does not collude well. It does not really go well or mesh well, I think, with the crossbow cast, right? Like with the SS, right? Like, I don't think it meshes well with that. Like, it feels like there were times where Ren's character arc felt like a little too much like fan service for people who have played Sky. Which, I mean, fan service is not a bad thing, right? Like, I do really love fan service in these games, right? Because it does feel like the writers are respecting the players who have gone through all of these games and all of these adventures, right? And have gotten to know all of these characters. But I think Estelle and Joshua's involvement and Ren's character arc should have been dialed back and maybe held back for the sequel, and maybe this game should have done a better job of honing in on the main cast proper, right? Because I do really feel like, as a result of all of this Sky focus, that was like all this carryover Sky focus, that the crossbow cast really did suffer as a result of that, right? That is just me. Like, I'm sure there are people who really don't really care about that sort of thing, but just personally, like, I would have much rather have the crossbow cast like have their own game without any without any strong Sky interference, right? Like, Cold Steel does have Prince Oliver, for instance, right? But he's not like in your face all the time like how Estelle and Joshua and Ren are, right? Like, I don't know, I just would have really preferred all of the Sky fans, I would have preferred the majority of these Sky character arcs and just the Sky fan service to be more for the sequel and rather than this game, right? Like, that's just me though. Because personally, I think it's a far better writing choice to develop the main cast first of this new saga, rather than bring in old characters to kind of carry it for some players, right? Because Estelle, Joshua, and Ren were kind of the highlights of this game for me in a way, right? Like, because I already care about them, so I already feel invested in what their problems are, right? And like what they're doing. Whereas for Lloyd and the others, right, like, they just kind of feel like background characters for the majority of this game, right? Like, it's like, I just don't really I don't really agree with the way that the Sky cast and the crossbow cast were handled in this game. Like, Ren, like, I really loved Ren's character arc, right? Like, her with her family and everything, with her family and her really tragic and fucked up backstory. Like, I think it was masterful, but it would have been better put in the sequel, in my opinion, because, as I've said numerous times, right, already for like the past few minutes, they should have just focused on the crossbow cast in this game, right? Like with the occasional cameo or fan service, right? Like, they handle Lecter and Kilika pretty well, in my opinion, right? Like, Kilika and Lecter do have a presence, but it does not dominate screen time, right? Like, they're there for a little while and that's it, right? They play very supporting roles. And I kind of wish that for this game, Estelle, Joshua, and Ren were also more in the vein of how Kilika Lecter War, right? Because this should have been the special support sections game, but it instead felt like Sky 3.5 at like various points throughout this game. I mean, if there is praise that I do have to give to Crossbell, it's obviously the music, right? Like, it goes without saying, but every Falcom game, in my opinion, has, well, except for Tokyo Xanadu, I'm not really too big on that game's OST, but almost every Falcom game, this and Azure especially included, I think have some of the best soundtracks in the series, right? Like, there's some real bangers in these two games, you know? But like, the thing is, like, music can't carry a game by, like, music alone can't carry such a long JRPG, right? Like, you have to have, like, well-written characters, a cohesively engaging plot. There's a lot you have to do in order to make a JRPG feel compelling, and I feel like Crossbell fails in kind of almost every respect, you know? Like, the only other praise I could give to Crossbell, maybe, is the combat, right? Like, while Trails' combat is one of, I think, the weaker aspects of the series, I do think that Crossbell is the most balanced of all the sagas, right? Like, Sky is a little bit too bullshit at times, in my opinion, right? And Cold Steel is a little too easy, right? Crossbell feels like a nice middle ground, right? Like, yes, like the normal the normal encounters feel very pointless due to the party rush, but like, I think, like, aside from that, like, the combat is kind of well balanced for the most part, right? Like, I do prefer Cold Steel combat, but I don't dislike Crossbell's combat. Like, I did enjoy it. Something else that I have a problem with in Crossbell is Crossbell itself, like as a city, right? Like, I think the platform of choice for Crossbell really does kill it, right? Because I think Sky, right, like, for being such like a low end game, I don't think the lack of the budget really killed it for it, because you're doing a lot of traveling in Sky 1 and 2, right? So due to that, I think it's understandable that you would not, like, see any of these towns and cities that extensively, right? Like, I think that makes sense. But in Crossbell, right, like, you're primarily just in Crossbell, right? In Crossbell, like, it feels very cramped, very small. It feels like it does not feel like it does not feel like the bustling tourist-riddled metropolis that you hear about in Sky and Cold Steel, right? Like, it just kind of feels like a lazy. I don't want to say lazy, but it just feels like if this were on a console, maybe, right? It could have been done a lot more justice, right? Like, I don't know, like, when you see Crossbell in Cold Steel 3 and 4, like, even then, I don't think it's big enough, right? And I guess it's because the whole game doesn't take place there, right? Like, but with how Crossbell is, like, talked up to be this, like, massive, like, tourist area, right? Like, where, like, there's so many, like, people and, like, places to go. It just feels very, very small. And when I was playing this game, right, like, I felt no desire to explore I felt no desire to explore the city beyond what the story and side quests were like, right? Like, the NPCs as well weren't really that interesting, right? Like, I just felt no strong desire to learn more about Crossbell, because they do a very poor job of trying to make you feel invested in this city, which is a pretty grave issue because you spend the majority of your time in Crossbell, right? So yeah, that's how I feel about Crossbell. I realized that I haven't talked about Kia yet, right? So Kia is a character that, it feels kind of wrong for me to criticize her because she's a kid, right? But even though there's one aspect to her character that I do like in the sequel, it does hurt this game a lot, which is a pretty huge cost. And even aside from that plot point, Kia in this game, in my opinion, right, they don't do a good job of making you care about her. Like, her being a cute kid, in my opinion, isn't enough to make me care about her, right? Like, she lost her memories and all of that jazz, right? Which is kind of cool on the surface, but I think she comes in the game a bit too late, right? I think if she were established, maybe in chapter 2, maybe even 1, right? Make her really feel really feel attached to you for more of the game, right? For the duration of the game. I think doing that would have made her feel far more compelling, right? Because by the time she comes into this game, right, you're more than halfway through the game, right? And it's it feels a bit awkward because it's okay, I mean, I spent all these chapters with these characters, and now we have just this random girl that I just don't know about, right? And everyone cares for her really quickly because she's a cute kid who has amnesia, and it's I mean, is that really the best you could do about that? I feel if she came in earlier, they could have done a lot more with her as a character, maybe delve more into her character as someone who has lost her memories, right? Because I don't think making her not care too much about it now, when you first meet her, I don't think that cuts it. I think in order to make you care about her, you have to give her some sort of inward character conflict, so that you can feel attached to her, right? Especially for a kid, right? I don't know, she's not I don't think she's that bad, but I think she would have been better put near the beginning of the game, right? I think that would have been far better, in my opinion. So yeah, oh geez. So aside from that, I think I've talked about the majority of my issues with this game, and also what I've liked as well. I do think Azure is a worse game, right? Trails from Azure is, in my opinion, by far the worst Trails game by fucking miles, right? There is so much wrong with that game. But this game is also, after replaying it, I realized that I do like it less than I used to, but I do also think it's better than how Trails from Azure is, right? And also, just to clarify, I harbor no ill will towards Geofront, the translation team. They did a fantastic, amazing job with this shit. This felt like a professional level localization, right? I couldn't tell the difference a lot of the time when I was playing this game, right? This did not feel like a typical fan translation project. This felt legitimate. It felt well planned. It felt like a lot of positive effort was honed into this fan translation project, right? There were the occasional typos, but I mean, with how massive a script this game has, right? I can't really blame them, right? 99% of this game was fantastically well done with its translated script, right? Like, they did a fantastic job with it. I can forgive a few typos because, I mean, it's like, these are fans doing it, right? Like, it's not a fucking... It's not a fucking local... It's not like it's like Exceed or Nisa, right? Like, these are just fans doing it because they love the game, right? Like, they love Crossbell and Trails, right? Like, I can't at all fault that, right? Like, I do have to applaud that, right? Like, they put a lot of effort into this, and it really shows. Yeah, so, like, I mean, like, the community does, like, I don't get along with the Trails community, right? Like, as a whole, right? Like, I have a lot of trauma with the community, from the Falcom Discord to just the Falcom fanbase on Twitter, right? Like, it's by far, in my opinion, the worst fanbase I have ever dealt with and I've ever seen. Like, by far. Because not only do a lot of the Crossbell fan, like a lot of the Crossbell fans in my experience are very toxic, very dedicated to the Crossbell games as a whole, right? Like, if you don't like Crossbell, right? Like, I've gone through the story of how there are officially worse localized games like Tales of Berseria, yeah. Like, I mean, like, I could go through my story with the fanbase, right? Like, back in the day, like 2 or so years ago. Well, not even two full years ago. Like back in the day, like, I was active on Twitter, right? Like, I was part of the Falcom fanbase, right? Like, I talked with a lot of the fans, and when I played through Crossbell, right, and I gave my impressions of it on Twitter, right? Like, I got harassed, I got really toxic, threatening DMs for sharing that I disliked Crossbell, right? Like, when I beat Azure, right? Like, it was a big deal because I did have somewhat of a Twitter following, right? Like, I had a few hundred followers, and I got shat on excessively for disliking those games, right? And at a point, I kind of lost it, right? Like, I got really upset, and just seeing Crossbell profile pictures and just seeing the game discussed in a positive light really got me, right? And because of that, right? Like, I ended up I made a tweet saying how seeing Crossbell profile pictures, like, they got to me, right? Like, they kind of upset me because of how negative and just, like, toxic my experience with the fandom has been, right? But when I made that tweet, right, like, I was harassed by dozens and dozens and dozens of Falcom fans, right? And I was like mass blocked and cancelled by the Falcom fanbase because of how I felt, right? And at first, right, like, I thought that I was to blame for that because of how I made that tweet, but I feel like the tweet I made was so inoffensive and just so minute, right? Like, that I don't think it should have upset anyone, right? Like, I feel like in my case, right, like, being upset for being harassed, like, day in and day out through DMs and tweets, and also the Falcom Discord to a very small extent there because I wasn't there for a long time. Like, I feel like in that case, like, I feel like it's understandable for me to be upset, right? I should have stepped away from Twitter, but I do also feel like that tweet I made, which triggered the fan base to, like, hate me, was not at all warranted, right? And I do feel like I deserve, like, proper apologies for what happened, but that will probably never happen, right? But yeah, I mean, like, I can't deny that a lot of my hatred for Crossbell, not only comes from the games themselves being really terrible in my opinion, but also just from the fan base. worshipping these two games like they are the best games ever made, right? And dismissing people who like the Cold Steel Saga, like me, right? Like, they use Crossbell pretty much as a stepping stone to ridicule those who like the Cold Steel Saga, right? And it's kind of like a trend I see with a lot of like with a lot of fandoms. Like, for example, right, like in the Ace Attorney fan base, right, which I'm not really involved in, there are these two, well, actually three. There are these three Japanese exclusive exclusive Ace Attorney games, right, that never made their way here. Two of them have have pretty good fan translations, but like they are, like, the Japanese exclusive games are praised the most compared to the rest of the series, right? And tons and tons and tons of people like to use those Japanese exclusive games as stepping stones to ridicule and demean not only the other games in the Ace Attorney franchise, but also people who like the other games, right? They're like, it feels to me like there's this air of superiority that comes from these people playing these Japanese exclusive, non-localized titles, right? Like that's how it almost feels like to me, because it's the exact same in both the Falcom community and the Ace Attorney community, right? Like, there's this very dangerous and toxic mentality that a lot of people use these games to ridicule others who like the other games that they think are worse, right? Like, it's a very disturbing hive mind mindset, right? But yeah, I think I've discussed the fanbase enough here. And honestly, at this point, I think I've discussed the extent to what I want to discuss about Crossbell. Trails as a whole is a franchise that is very close to my heart, right? Like, I followed the series since around the time Sky 1 was first localized, right? Like, back in 2013, 2014-ish, right? Like, when it came out on the PSP. By complete coincidence, right? Like, I follow the series since back then, and it's my second and Trails as a whole is my second favorite gaming franchise of all time, right? Like, behind Kingdom Hearts. And honestly, Trails would be my personal favorite franchise of all time if Crossbell just wasn't so shit, right? Like, Crossbell is what ultimately holds back Trails for me as a franchise, right? Like, it's the weakest and shortest length of Trails in my opinion, right? Like, if these games didn't exist, or if they were just not as terrible, Trails would be my favorite gaming franchise of all time. But as it stands with how they are now, just with how they are, right? Crossbell, I think, is a pretty heavy burden that does weigh down the Trails. That does weigh down the Trails franchise as a whole, right? Like, that's how I feel about it. And yeah, I think I've talked about all that I want to talk about here about Trails from Zero. And while I will not be streaming Sky right away, the plan is to stream Trails in the Sky next. I do want to stream that saga next. There have been some attempts in the past, but I think now that I've streamed through a whole Trails game again, right? Because I streamed through Cold Steel 1 and 2 years ago, and now having done a long non-voiced game like Trails from Zero, I think I feel prepared to tackle the Sky trilogy. So with all that being said, I think I am going to end off the stream here for today, and in the near future, I will be starting up Trails in the Sky FC. So see you guys then. Have a fantastic day, and goodbye.